I hate Yooka-Laylee, and today you will learn why. But before I get into things, let me just start with a little disclaimer. To understand where I'm getting from, it's important that I establish my relation to this game. It's very easy for someone who was glued to their seats, waiting impatiently for months after Yuka first appeared on Kickstarter, who maybe even funded it, to build up an immense hype until the very day of the game's release. I, however, refrain from such and try my best to stay away from any news or early releases so that I can come in with a fresh mind. I don't want to exhaust myself and make up this version in my head, which is impossible to fulfill by the company. For example, as much of a Zelda fan as I am, I bought Breath of the Wild coming in without any feelings or expectations, other than the very first teaser that was shown 3 years before. This neutral stance as to this can either suck or not made it impossible for me not to be widely impressed, and made me absorb more of the game's positives than negatives. Getting back to Yooka-Laylee, I went through a similar process. I am an enormous fan of Banjo-Kazooie and the Golden Age rarer type platformers. To me, this wasn't a matter of this can either suck or not. In my head, this could only turn out great. You got Playtonic, a team made out of most of the original staff working behind Banjo-Kazooie, seeking out to succeed it 17 years later. Now, let me play you a clip from Donkey's video about Yooka-Laylee.
It ends up feeling like a fan tribute rather than something a team of professionals worked on.
That pretty much sums up this video, but regardless, let's begin. Yooka-Laylee begins much like you'd expect. You have a simple and silly plot, which starts with the main antagonist and his goal, which ends up involving our heroes in one way or the other. However, instead of saving your younger sister, you're just curious about a book you found, and what this next-door evil corporation is plotting. And I'm okay with that. The last thing I want out of these types of games is an important story, and the fact that our hero's only drive is the sense of an adventure and exploration is something I can totally get behind. But this does not excuse the fact that the opening act leading up to the first level is utterly boring and underwhelming. Jumping a little ahead in terms of this video structure, I just have to point out that the music used for the entirety of this part is static and unfitting. In Banjo-Kazooie, you had a dynamic soundtrack that changed depending on what was happening on the screen. So let's examine the two different introductions and see what I mean. We get a view of the outside of a witch's lair. There's green fog and lightning striking from the sky, just to solidify the ominous and evil that lurks within. While this is happening, we hear this mysterious and almost adventurous music playing. As the camera is working its way up towards the stairs, the music is building up the tension of what's to come. And as the door opens up, the soundtrack kicks into something much louder and sinister. We see the witch herself, Gruntilda. Her theme song plays. I won't delve much into her dialogue, but basically she's obsessed with being the prettiest of them all. The talking cooking pot, however, mentions this other girl, which makes Gruntilda freak the fuck out. The music kicks up dramatically for just a second, matching her reaction perfectly. As she looks down into whatever the hell she's brewing, we see the reflection of that girl, Tooty. Tooty, being the adorable little sister of Banjo, has a very pleasant, innocent theme song, which starts playing for a couple of seconds, however played out in a slower pace and much darker to fit the mood. Gruntilda looks up and won't believe what she's seeing. Meanwhile, the music adds more tension and speed than before. Gruntilda then decides to go outside and straight up jank the girl. And the music, oh, you all get my point. I could do this for the entire opening cutscene. Every part has music that changes to the current situation, transitions well, and fits. I'll have a link in the description if you want to see the entire thing for yourself. Now, let's look at Yooka-Laylee's cutscene. Besides the standard starting outside the villain's lair trope, they did something actually interesting. They begin with loud, dramatic music, then the much calmer yet bombastic hub world soundtrack. However, that's the fucking problem. It's just the hub world music. None of the scenes matched the soundtrack because it wasn't designed for this cutscene. And no, don't get me wrong, the theme matches the antagonist, and the theme matches this location. But for it to play out normally, like it does when walking around yourself, not changing in variations or swapping instruments for any effects for maybe a joke or something is just boring. But this first scene is not my biggest problem, however. It's the introduction to our heroes and their involvement in the story. Now, since I feel like I've already made my point, I won't delve into this subject much further. Let me just show you how this scene is ridiculous. Sure is some nice and soothing music to a massive act of theft. This is unrelated, but these idle animations are pissing me off. Like, why is Laylee just freaking out every now and then? It looks like she's just about to take off, but suddenly she's laying back down like time reversed or something. It happens 3 times during their conversation. Oh no, our dumb book we just found is flying away. How horrible. Too bad the music doesn't care. It just keeps on playing its peaceful tune like nothing's going on in this world. It's dumb. And then we have the tutorial. Probably the most boring one I've encountered in a 3D platformer. Well, DK64 had a pretty bad one as well, but besides that. You're directed towards this cage door and a snake. And by the way, this snake's design is freaking genius, but I'll talk more about him later. You learn the ability to attack, which in this game is Yooka spinning the fuck around. You're then told to look for 5 quills, this game's equivalent of notes, which lets you move around the starting area, experiment with your first ability, and get used to the basic controls of jumping and running. Now, I'm not saying that this part is a crime, and it doesn't take up too much of your time either. I just want to point out that Banjo-Kazooie, a 19-year-old game, gave you the choice of skipping the tutorial, regardless of if it was your first playthrough or not. But let's take a closer look on that tutorial anyway. In Spiral Mountain, that game's starting area, you're told by this mole guy to look for him around the place so he can teach you the different moves. Each little area, nicely placed around in a circle, has a dedicated challenge for each move, letting you use them in practice. You're also rewarded for this by acquiring the empty honeycomb pieces, which will extend your maximum health. This makes it so that the player didn't feel that their time was wasted doing these tasks, and instead incentivizes the player to do more in the future, to be rewarded. Spiral Mountain also features parts in which the mole doesn't even tell you about, which rewards you for going the extra mile and promotes for exploration on your part. I've scurried around all of Yooka-Laylee's introductory area and was surprised when there was nothing at all to find. There is, however, a cannon dude which you can interact with later to acquire a Pagey, this game's equivalent of a Jiggy, by using a move you learn in the first world. But this just asks of you to walk all the way back there, get the thing, and never return again. There was no need for this cannon dude to be here instead of inside the hub world. Once you get the quills, the gate opens and you can make your way towards the Ivory Towers. There is a simple little tutorial teaching you how to duck and swim, which isn't a huge problem. If the game had stopped just to tell me how to perform these actions, I would mind, but since it didn't, I'm glad. But when there's enemies, however, the game needs to be super sure that we know that they're bad guys and that we can attack them. This game pausing and camera showing you what's ahead thing is the single most dumbest thing in video game history. This game does it, Zelda does it, every game does it, I'm so tired of it! Look at Half-Life 2. Kleiner is talking, yet I'm doing whatever the fuck I want. Yeah, I'm listening, doctor. And the "this game is for kids" argument can just suck my ass. It's not like I played Super Mario 64 as a kid, saw a Goomba and was like, "Hi, will you be my friends?" Oh gosh. Why not give the player the opportunity to observe and discover him or herself how to interact with the 2 blue mouth guys? What the hell even is this guy supposed to be? Whatever, blah blah blah. You get inside Ivory Towers, and before you even get to take a proper look at the place, you're stopped again to look at some new piece of information. The camera is looking away, completely ignoring this new location that you just want to get busy exploring. However, you have to wait like a fool and talk to a snake wearing pants. Yes, I know, I love this snake, but so far he's only been there to haunt us. So get this, Snake's like, "Hey, I have another move, but you're gonna have to get me something first." Awesome, just tell me and I'll find it. Oh, it's up there. Okay, I guess I gotta figure out how to get on top of that statue that— oh, you're gonna show me the entire path in a slow moving fashion. I've been playing for 10 minutes and I already feel like an idiot. And then you get the rolling move, which lets you get to the first world. Now let me ask you this. What was the point of this entire section? As soon as we get into the first world, the hand-holding is gone. You have to do everything by yourself. So did you really think this would make a difference? Now, look at our good old friend Banjo-Kazooie. You enter Gruntilda's lair and you're like, okay, let's find my sister. Oh, I can't get up that slope. Oh, okay, here's a caged door. Here's a picture that's missing a puzzle piece. So you start looking for a puzzle piece, you explore a little, and bam! You can now access the first level. And nothing was explained or forcefully showed to you. And remember, this was also this game is for kids. Now, this might all seem like nitpicking, and if these were my only problems, this video wouldn't be 35 minutes long. It's just that when I find this much amount of things to point out, something's wrong. But anyway, now that we have the premise and tutorial out of the way, let's delve into this game's main attraction. The thing that most definitely defines these types of games. The levels or worlds. So in Banjo-Kazooie, each world had a little area around them in the hub world. You know what? Let's go back even further. To open a world, you had to find a picture, insert a certain amount of puzzle pieces, which you acquired throughout the game's hub and levels. The first picture was right next to the world, however later on you had to explore around the hub as they were scattered around, sometimes far away from their respective world. This built up a tension as you would insert the puzzle pieces, see some door or whatever open, a sign appear with the name of the world, hear an exciting jingle, and you stand there and be like, holy shit, I gotta get the fuck over there! It was a very simple yet real joy you felt as you would make your way towards it. As you approached the entrance, the hub world theme music would also transition into something more fitting to that specific area. Everything was there to both build up excitement and give personality. And every entrance area was very different, had cool things around, and a different opening, a chest, an advent calendar, a sewage pipe, a bubble that launched you up the air. Woo! Yooka has books. Walk up to the pedestal right next to it, insert pages, there you go. Mildly uninteresting if you ask me. And don't get me wrong please, having worlds be inside tomes is fine, but they did nothing out of the idea besides collecting pages. And these areas surrounding them have no identity. Okay, sure, there's snow outside the snow world and casino props outside the casino world, but where's that sweet soundtrack transition? And I get that Gruntilda's lair and Highbury Towers look different interior-wise. The home of a witch can magically go from one location to the other, while a factory needs a little more consistency. But it's also a game with talking shopping carts, so I don't think anyone would question something a little more varied and fitting just for convenience sake. But I digress, let's get into the meat of this thing. These worlds are freaking massive, and I'd say that all the 5 worlds this game boasts are about the same in size and content. And same can be said with difficulty, but I'll save that for later. Now, here's my problem. They made giant levels, and yes, there's stuff in them, like little challenges, a boss fight, things to collect. You know, what you'd expect, but not nearly enough to keep them feel busy. Like, okay, there's 200 quills to collect instead of the typical 100, and they're scattered around to fill in the gaps as you traverse these enormous areas. But there's still way too many open spots with nothing going on in them, and walking back and forth just feels empty. The only thing that kinda works with this new approach to the level design is Yooka's faster movement than Banjo, and the rolling move, which is also much quicker than the iconic talent trot. The layout, however, is confusing, and I end up getting lost all the time. The hub world is just as bad, and the amount of time you'll spend in one level is just stupid. They could have doubled the world count and trimmed them in size for a much more varied and interesting selection. Just to give you an idea of what these worlds are missing out, let's go back to Banjo-Kazooie once again. There's just something about how immediate everything is laid out. You can just walk up to the side and you'll find notes, a Jinjo, a Mumbo token. You'll follow the path up and find a village with purple enemy guys, a spinning totem, Mumbo's hut, where you can transform. You walk off to the side and find a giant anthill with termites. You can scale upwards to collect a statue of yourself. Over here's a Stonehenge where you'll learn the talent trot. Down the hill is Conga, who'll throw oranges at you, but you can collect one of them from his tree and give them to this small chimp. And then you can fight Conga by shooting eggs at him. There's also some water. And now over to some more Yooka. You start out with a slope that you have to roll upwards, then you enter this large, barren area with only a couple of quills scattered around, and 2 enemies that poses next to no threat. There's a dead end to the side, up a bridge, where you fight a bunch of those same enemies. And when you're done, you go back, and you gotta walk a little before you find something new. You actually have to walk around quite a bit, so you find a temple, and there's a couple of things going on here. Well, there's 2 NPCs you can interact with, which slows down the pacing and is way too early, but they're placed in the center of the world for convenience sake, so I can forgive that. There's so many things around that you can't even do anything about yet, because you need to learn moves from Trouser, the snake, but you'll need quills, so get busy looking. And, well, already I have to look back at the footage or look it up on the internet, because there's too many places to remember. They're not distinguishable and they're too far apart. And I've only used the first levels in both games as examples, but I could do this with all of them. My point is that the moment-to-moment action that Banjo has is gone from Yooka's level design, and cranks the pacing down to a grinding halt. My main issue though, is that when I load up Banjo-Kazooie, my main instinct is, what's over here, what's over there? But in Yooka it's like, oh, there's something over there, I guess I gotta walk over there. Oh man, over there as well. It's gonna be a long day. It's not fun. Okay, I'm going to be more specific from now on and go through specific parts from both games and compare. Starting off with the transformations. And this part is easy. Yooka's transformations is the biggest disappointment since my pets died. In Banjo, they were fun to control, felt useful and necessary, fit the level perfectly, and had more than one use. None of this applies to Yooka. This fucking plant thing is garbage. You move around so slowly, and the only thing you can do is spray dumb plant jizz over buds in this one challenge to get a Pagey. But if you want, you can move around the world at a snail's pace and spray other plants to get hints, none of which are slightly insightful, and to a greater point, fucking needed. Now, how about the termite from Banjo? You can't attack anymore, but you're quick on your feet and you can climb slopes that you couldn't before. You can also get the notes down in the water instead of slowly swimming down as Banjo. And as an extra little reward, you can get a Jiggy on top of the world entrance by leaving the level. That's a lot of things for just one simple transformation. And this isn't even told to you. But in Yooka, they wanted you to be perfectly clear on what to do with your transformation, including the fucking camera showing you this other plant that wants your help the second you transform. This snowplower piece of shit has at least a couple of things going on for him. It moves fast and has a usage across the map, but it still controls like monkey balls. I get it, it's ice. Ice is slippery. But this is ridiculous, man! Just try to jump across platforms in this thing. It's like watching a cat trying to write an essay on dark matter. You just wanna scream, you can't fucking do it! Aesthetically, they look great, much like every character model in this game does. And the third world transformation, which is a school of piranha fish, is so creative, but it still leaves much to be desired. This helicopter has no need to be here, since you can fly around with Laylee. This boat isn't fun, and this boss battle can suck my shit. The transformations are terrible. They at least give you the ability to revert back to normal whenever and wherever you are, which is a welcome change. But it seems like they tried way too hard. You don't need to be a boat with complicated different attacks. You just need to be a pumpkin who is small so you can go through smaller openings and walk on the bottom of the water. It's also scary since you can't attack anymore in this haunted world. As a walrus, you can walk in the cold water without being damaged, and you're small enough to race against this polar bear. The alligator gets a fun and challenging minigame, and the bee is silly. It's such seamless and effortless difference that changes the level and opens new possibilities. Another flaw in Yooka's design philosophy is that they can't even remember it themselves. With its more open world aspect and choosing your own way to play, which is made apparent by the level design, the tonics, the order you can purchase new abilities and such, I find it strange how only one collectible is required for the transformations instead of the multiple Mumbo tokens from Banjo-Kazooie. By only having one, you're gonna have a much harder time finding it and get to transform. By having multiple, however, you would have more things to collect in the world and also adhere to the promise of carving your own path. Even though Mumbo's Mountain had 5 that was required to transform, you would be rewarded in the later worlds by collecting as many as possible in the earlier ones. And as notes usually did, they helped fill in the gaps so areas didn't feel empty. If anyone is thinking about Banjo-Tooie and how they did the exact same thing, I'm well aware of it. Which is why, unless you haven't noticed, that I haven't mentioned that game even once. So let's move on instead. Now this part actually makes me kinda sad. The Ghostwriters, which is the equivalent of Jinjos, is a very nice touch. Having them all be buried in terms of the way to collect them is genius, but they're still a pain in the fucking ass and not fun. Remember how I talked about how everything in Banjo felt immediate? Well, nothing about these unlikable fuckers is immediate. This blue one you gotta walk around in circles and shoot sonars for a couple of minutes before it shows up. I have no earthly idea how it works. There is no feedback as in whether I'm doing it right or not. I just end up revealing him after trying long enough. This red one is at least a bit more clever and requires you to think, but it still annoys me to no end. The rest I don't really have a problem with, but they're not really anything special either. I just think they could have done something better out of this idea. Okay, let's talk about the goddamn enemies and the boring ass combat. This never played an important role in Banjo, but it's still just laughable how they managed to fuck it up so bad. So to use Mumbo's Mountain as an example once again, you had purple guys that followed you, termites that sorta just walked around unpredictably, big invincible ox that fucked you up, and Conga who threw oranges. You could punch them, peck them, thrust them, roll into them, shoot eggs, and ground pound. In Yooka you have blue mouth guys, flying asshole bees, and googly eyes. They're in all the levels, and all you need to do is spam your spin attack. Just think about the immense difference in size between these two levels. How in God's name did they agree to only include 3 fucking enemies? Let's examine this further. Treasure Trove Cove had 2 types of crabs, jumping clams, treasure chest, floating bomb, snacker, and nipper. And yes, I know, Yooka has a boss in every level, and these stupid inept robot guys, actually inept should have been the title for the game, but the levels are also 5 times bigger, and it came out this year. In Clanker's Cavern you got chompers coming out of the walls, Bubble Gloop Swamp you got dragonflies and frogs, got evil snowmen, goopy ghosts, tombstone guys, floating rings? Yooka just reskins this same enemy in every level, like Warrior World on GameCube. And yes, Banjo did the same thing with certain enemies, like the purple guys returned as mummies, skeletons, sailors, and Peter Pans. But with all these different enemy types, and the fact that they didn't reuse them until like 5 levels in, makes it completely acceptable. There's also the issue that they just don't fit. And isn't it enough that these are already all over the hub world? I would react the same way if Grunty's minions appeared in one of the levels, but they stay outside to make room for something else, something new. And to me, it just makes more sense for an enemy to break out of the world instead of going in. But let me get back to a couple I missed. Later on you have these giant brutes and... actually that was all of them. And yes, you have multiple abilities like 2 types of sonars, tumbling in the air, ground pound, and projectiles that you get from eating fruit. But the only thing you're ever gonna need is this. There's nothing to this combat besides spamming repeatedly. And don't even get me started on the enemy's pattern. And it's pretty obvious that they wanted to make a bigger deal out of the combat than before. Just look at this part in the first world. The dead end I was talking about earlier is most likely the first place you'll go to, and it's a sequence of enemies spawning for you to get accustomed fighting in groups. Something that repeats itself later with almost no variation or upgrade in difficulty. Some of them have hats, by the way. I might as well talk about the bosses while we're at it. Banjo didn't really have bosses, unless you count Conga and Nipper, so there isn't much to compare it to. Most of them are good ideas, and none of them are alike. One thing they do have in common, however, is that they're complete dogshit to fight against. The camera completely fucks the first boss, same can be said with the angle of the second. Main issue is, however, that it lasts for an eternity. Third boss suffers from unresponsive jumping, fourth boss I'm saving for later, and fifth boss is impossible to avoid! You know what? Let me get this out of my system already. It's time to talk about the horrendous minecart segments. This is without any doubt the absolute worst part in the entire game. In every world you find Kartos, a talking minecart who you can ride in a broken minigame ripped straight out of Donkey Kong Country, where you have to collect a certain amount of gems before you reach the goal. Much like in Donkey Kong 64, you lose gems whenever you collide with something. Interesting and engaging in theory, but a complete and utter failure in practice. This honestly doesn't feel like it was finished. It's unresponsive, has things coming out of the corners at any time. You have the ability to shoot a projectile in front of you, making it useless when in the middle of a turn, since it would fly away from the track. There is also a delay between shots, which you get no indication of. You have absurd hitbox detections and unmemorable layouts. You're basically riding around the world you're currently in, making good use of the scenery. There isn't much more to that idea, however, and it requires too much focus for you to have a look around anyway. Look at Tropical Freeze! That's how you make fucking compelling minecart levels! Gosh, those are fun! And then to make matters even worse, you turn this monstrosity into the fourth world boss battle. A surprising turn of events, but not at all welcome. This fight is an unforgivable mess that even this shitty game doesn't deserve. I feel like it's time for a change of pace. Let's talk about some of the more positive parts of the game, namely the soundtrack. Composed by superheroes Grant Kirkhope and David Wise, there's nothing disappointing about it. Something important to note in terms of Yooka's music and sound design is that everything is supposed to be a lot more relaxed. The instrument Yooka-Laylee is usually associated with something calm and chill. The banjo, however, is easily portrayed as something much more upbeat, added with the obnoxious kazoo, and you have the catchy songs of Banjo-Kazooie. Yooka, however, is going for something much more different, and isn't trying to exhaust you considering the much larger levels you will be spending a lot more time in. This is why the music spends longer to build up excitement. My point is, even though I prefer Banjo's soundtrack more, I'd say they did a very good job with Yooka's. Still, they really should have included more variants and transitions like I mentioned earlier. My biggest issue, however, is that David's compositions were used in the terrible Minecart and oh god, I haven't even talked about Rextro's Arcade yet. Well, here we freaking go! I understand, guys. Minigames are fun. Banjo-Tooie had a whole bunch of them, and to be able to replay them from the menu as well as include more players was a brilliant decision. This didn't carry over so well in Yooka. These suffer from a lot of the same problems that Kartos had, and it makes me feel like I'm alpha testing Mario Party games. Unpolished and unresponsive, incredibly disconnected from the core game. I honestly don't understand what the fuck they're doing here. I could go through all of them, but why the hell bother? When I first saw this dinosaur and his arcade, I was expecting some 8-bit style parodies of Donkey Kong or other games of that time, not some awful iPhone game. Okay, look, my biggest reason for being so negative about all this is that it's fucking required to beat the game! For me, these types of games are all about the 100% completion mark. And to do that, you have to not only beat these unholy fuckers once, but twice! 25 pages in every level, and 2 of them in each is given to you after beating these foolish minigames. Another is given by beating the atrocious Minecart segment. And then you have the horrid bosses, the confusing ghost riders, and the god-forsaken transformations. What you end up with is just a bunch of timed events to get pages in cages. How fucking lame is. That is some pure bullshit. Now, this subject is a bit tougher to explain, and I doubt a lot of people will agree with me, since this could be a problem I'm having because of my not so great laptop. However, whether I'm using the keyboard or a controller, I always end up having difficulties jumping correctly. I can't exactly put it into words and give good examples, but at very crucial moments, the game all of a sudden decides that I can't double jump or can't attack in the air or just can't jump at all. In any case, I find the jumping absolutely frustrating at times. Besides that, moving around as Yuka and rolling with Laylee feels solid enough. Most of the moves are natural and useful. I don't, however, understand the need of a power meter. Most of your abilities, including rolling, drains your meter pretty quickly. Unless you come in contact with butterflies, which also refills your health if you eat them, you're gonna have to wait a while for it to fill up again. So even though you can roll around the world at high speeds, you're gonna have to walk for just as long, provided you don't find any butterflies. Now, the only reason I can think of for this decision is to make challenges based around time and meter management. And as interesting as that can get, I would much rather prefer unlimited resources. It makes more sense for the camouflage ability, however, so I understand why they included it. I just wish they found another way. For example, instead of having an ammo count for projectiles like the eggs from Banjo, you instead eat different elemental fruits, granting a temporary power-up. I'm not saying that all the abilities should have been based around this concept, but it shows how different methods can be utilized. They could at least have had the meter replenished instantly, but slower, instead of having to wait so fucking long. And also, getting back to technical difficulties that varies from computer to computer, I have experienced an abundance of loading times. Starting up the game or a save file is one thing, but when I gotta load in between the hub world, something's terribly wrong. And while the hints that are given during it, a popular thing in games that are aware of their loading times, are nice to include. However, I can't say I ever found one that I hadn't already figured out or would have figured out as soon as I got into a world. I'm also pretty sure I ran out of hints after the third or fourth screen. This is a weird thing to complain about, so I'm moving on. I mentioned earlier that I would touch upon the game's difficulty, which I now feel is an appropriate time. As I've gone through different aspects already, it should have become pretty clear what the difficulty in this game is caused by. The camera, the sometimes unresponsive controls, the dreadful minigames, and confusing designs. Nothing in this game is actually hard. It's just tedious and doesn't work correctly. Completing it feels like a task that I should have been paid for. Finding and collecting stuff feels less important and are sometimes hidden at the most ridiculous places. Add on with the notion that the levels are gigantic and chaotic, looking for the last quills or pages quickly becomes a true pain in the ass. As I stated way back, the challenge pretty much stays the same all throughout, something I'm betting most will disagree with. But my definition of challenge is not being at the whim of an unfinished product. The world expansion is not such a cool idea that everyone makes it out to be. It's different, but does very little for the game. It is the very embodiment of my concern with the world designs, the size, resulting in all the stuff I've already complained about. I also find it odd how you collect pages and then you spend them to expand the world to collect pages. Anyway, I don't see any point in this addition and hold true to my statement that I would have more levels instead of just 5 that you can expand. It's also boring to have stuff being spoiled to you. Getting back to the unholy camera, showing you what's ahead once you've expanded and entered. I don't need to see this, just let me get in there and find out myself what has changed. God! That's the keyword right there, changed, which it doesn't. It's just more of the level, nothing is actually different. The characters in this game all look cool and have the funny, expected British humor we all love. However, it seems Platonic loved them so much, they decided to just put them in all the levels. These 4 knights have no place in any of the levels. They don't fit the tribal one, they don't fit the casino, and they should never be in space. Clara, the skeleton adventurer, is to be expected in this world, as she portrays the typical getting cooked alive and about to be eaten by islanders trope. But it falls short the second she pops up again in the second world, and even in the third world. What? Shovel Knight is... Okay, I don't really care. Shovel Knight is the only ray of sunlight that this game has ever come in contact with. On the top of my head, I can't really remember anyone else besides the main cast, so I might as well talk about them. Yooka is Banjo, just not a dumb funny bear, and Laylee is Kazooie, just a bat. Trowser's design is god tier level, and his voice is just the best. I don't really care for his inclusion though, and found most of his abilities quick to forget and underutilized. Vendy has these tonics, which is kinda nice actually, but I feel like half of them is useless compared to the others. Capital B is nothing special to me besides when he disguised himself in the 4th world, which was actually funny. Speaking of funny, Dr. Quack is my favorite character. Still, his quickfire quiz got boring very quickly, and although it pays homage, they just didn't do anything special with it, and repeated it 3 times for duck's sake. Alright, there's still loads of stuff I could get way into, but I'm fucking tired. This was a little all over the place, but I hope you understood at least a point or two. They really messed up Yooka-Laylee. I mean like royally messed it up. I'm talking almost Sonic Team messed up. So many missed opportunities, a lackluster adventure with an absence of personality and wonder, unforgettable characters and empty levels. I skipped talking about the hub world, but fuck that too. Just a bunch of nonsense really this game. Subscribe! Oh yeah, the last boss also sucks.